Hey guys, welcome back to the FPL Script. This week's episode is Gameweek 34, podcast season 1, episode 4. I'm your co-host Fran, and we're just going to dive straight into our Gameweek 33 review. I got, once again, a little bit of variance tapping through keeping Kane in my team. I talked about how much FOMO I arguably had for the Salah and Isak hit. I don't think I was really forced to it because I didn't have price changes on my mind, which a lot of managers did. And obviously, when you look at the performance in Newcastle this week, it's very understandable why people want to go into someone like Isak just to get a part of the kind of goals that they're creating consistently, even away from home. I also got super lucky with Steele saving a penalty. So effectively, it was as good a game week as it could have been. But I did bench Fernandes, and I guess I just didn't know how great he was in terms of being an Iron Man. But yeah, that was arguably the week, and still very happy, of course, with the results. What about you, JD?
Yeah, I mean, we all knew that it was not going to be a good week for me because I had to take a -4 in order to set myself up for Game Week 34. So I went out of Kane essentially to go to Salah, but in order to do that, I had to take a -4 and finally transfer out James Ward-Prowse, who's actually been not that bad of an asset for me. But unfortunately, other than that, I didn't particularly get any good variance for me. And also, I think the Newcastle clean sheet wipeout was pretty good for us, right? Because at least for me, because I only owned one defender, so it was good for me, but maybe not that good for you. And I think we need to get to the worst part for me and the best part for you this week, which was the steal variance. So, how do you feel about stealing a bunch of points?
There was no stealing. There was a lot of saving actually. But yeah. I mean, I got lucky there. I think Estupinian, of course. I mean, two penalties.
Oof.
What I actually just liked about Steele really, and the variance that I felt I got, was actually the fact that he started. I was actually quite concerned.
Yeah, of
Even
course.
even for
Yeah.
Max 6, for example, I was quite concerned he wasn't going to start, but I ended up starting him anyways because I didn't really read or try to read too much into, I think, a lot of that last minute Twitter
Yeah.
FOMO. But I think that's sort of how the week went anyways for most people. Or you got Mings as well, and you got a lot of variance from him too.
Oh my goodness.
But
Yeah.
actually deserved as well because I think Fulham were diabolical, and we'll talk about Fulham too because they're such an essential team for building our sort of game week 34 strategy. So if we just talk about Kane downgrades, right? This was a talking point for last week, but now a lot of managers even keeping Kane, who I believe is something on 50% effective ownership. And that's going to continue to plummet, even though Kane had a great performance versus United. Some people, of course, might be reticent towards going for that move, but he is still the main major cash cow for Game Week 34, and he is your really only way to Salah, unless you have insane transfer value and going out of Watkins for some reason is going to help you out there.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the main options that we are looking at right now is, for example, someone like Jota versus Isak versus Solanke versus Greenwood.
Yeah.
And if you just want to have a player rooted to the third spot on your bench, you can go for Greenwood. I think that's fairly simple. But I think the more nuanced discussion is around the other three players. So, what are the drawbacks and what do you think are the advantages of going for someone like Jota, who is priced higher than someone like Isak? Or Solanke. And I'm just going to mention once again that I unequivocally tell people not to buy Martial. I said that last week. I'm going to say that again just because we need to get his name out of the conversation. But coming to specifics, do you think that Jota is actually a good transfer this week? Because how does it impact us later down the line?
Yeah, Jota's a weird one because I think he is a transfer you can only really get if you decide to bypass either one of Trent or Salah. I don't really see any
That's
teams
it.
with enough budget to actually be able to afford Jota, Salah, and Trent. And if you do, I mean, I commend you for all the price rises that you've got this season.
Yeah.
But he's not a serious option for me for people who are just looking for regular transfers. If on a free hit, I do think Jota is one to consider, but he does take away from Trent, who I prefer. Even Robertson, in my opinion, is actually probably still the third Liverpool player for me to get. So I would say Jota on that basis is not interesting. And as we talked about last week, he is going to probably miss out on one of the games in terms of starting. I can't see him starting both games. Maybe some people can, but even if he starts both games, you can have another scenario like in this West Ham game where he gets subbed off at 60 minutes. So effectively the same treatment that Gakpo got in the previous game. So that's concerning, first of all.
Yeah, Klopp just likes the 59th minute sub, right? I mean, I think he's just trolling at this point because it's happening in every single game. And also, as you can see, like we talked about last week, Diaz is getting more and more minutes, right? And he is having a different kind of impact on the team. I think the second goal that they scored was a direct result of Diaz being introduced into the game and causing havoc in the West Ham half. So that is a definite cause of concern for, I think, both sides of attack, except for Salah, because I don't think Salah is particularly affected by any of these players getting back to full fitness. But also coming to Isaac, which is the second player that we are discussing, he was benched this week. He came on, and even though technically speaking that wasn't an assist, I think just for pure footballing value, I think that was an assist. Like, it was just so beautiful the way he absolutely rinsed maybe 4 or 5 Everton players before laying it on a plate. Of course, it hit the post. It hit an Everton player and then went to Murphy, who scored. But he's just dynamic, and I understand why people had FOMO for not getting Isaac last week, and that's why so many people went to him. But going ahead, how do you see his minutes playing out? Because my opinion is that we have had enough of evidence to kind of make a judgment that he is most probably going to get benched in midweek games. So, what is your take on his minute situation?
Yeah, I think what's interesting about Isak, of course, is probably people might no longer be drawn to him as a captain 36, but I actually
Yeah,
think the benching makes him a stronger transfer option, particularly out of Kane for this week, which makes him even more scary, right? Because if
yeah,
you think that this sort of hot potato where Wilson gets 2 goals and Isak gets 2 goals and they start games back to back, then I am concerned, right? Isak, I think, is probably the by far best forward option compared to Martial as well. I don't think Martial is a serious pick, and those two players are actually within the same price range. I would 100% go Isak. The goal scoring ceiling for Newcastle is shown to be incredibly high. The XG is very, very consistent away and particularly at home. I think Isak is the best option to transfer in this week as a forward in isolation if you really didn't have to think about budget and how that impacts you. But I do think there is a drawback, right? Because when you are transferring in potentially Isak this week, and a lot of people will be thinking about going to Isak through a Arsenal midfielder, even a Grealish, you
yeah,
probably will restrict your budget a lot. And I think one of the concerns is on game week 35, you probably also have one Arsenal defender on your team, which a lot of people do. I understand some people might have kept Chilwell, some people even went Chilwell this week, but you are probably looking at some form of United and Liverpool defender in your team or a City defender as well. And that third spot is really, really bad for Game Week 35. So you're almost forcing a transfer in Game Week 35 there. I think a lot of people are expecting to roll in that week, but you probably will want to transfer a Zinchenko or a Gabriel into Pedro Porro if you don't have budget. But if you do have budget and you save that budget, and that means going to your Solanke and your Greenwood, as you mentioned earlier from the outset, that probably actually strengthens your team for 35 and and gives it a bit more rounding. I think the options are Konate, really, if you're going down from an Arsenal defender, or as I said, Pedro Porro. And I'm not sure if that's how you want to restrict your team for Game Week 35, because that's a huge concern of mine. And for that reason, I think Isak, as I said, is the best option, but you need to have a look at your budget as well and consider 35 as well. What do you think about Solanke as an option?
yeah. And I think the main consideration while we are talking about budget is the fact that Isak is expensive or more expensive than Solanke. So you can get Solanke, and as we discussed last week, he is a player you can definitely bench over maybe some premium assets that you might own. So it's less of a benching headache. Which of course I understand that it's not at the top of your priority checklist when you're looking for assets to buy, but also at the same time you can play him when he has a favorable fixture, and you can comfortably bench him when he doesn't. So one of the things that we are looking forward to, which is of course game week 35, because we don't want to be too myopic, even though the season is about to end. We're still looking at around 34, 35, 36, and if there are transfers that can help you out, let's say 3 weeks rather than just 34, it might be worth it to go for that player who helps you out in 3 weeks over a player who's just going to help you out in 1 week. So someone like Solanke could help you out in that respect, but again, it's completely dependent on your team value. So for someone like a player who has maybe Steele and Everson in goal, which sounds like ludicrous, because it's like you must have so much team value, right? Otherwise, because those two goalkeepers cost 7.6 between them, or something like that. So it's a point to consider for you when you go out of Grealish or Arsenal mids into, and also out of Kane into someone like Solanke, and then the midfielder you choose. So let's say you don't own Bruno right now, you want to go for Bruno or Rashford or someone else who doubles. Most likely Salah as well, right? Because Salah doesn't have that high of an ownership
Yeah.
till now, which is going to explode, I think, by the time we get to the deadline. So moving on to the midfield conundrum, I think Salah versus KDB. Should KDB's 19 pointer really change our plans for whom we buy next week?
I would say no. I think you have to look at least KDB until 37, which is the next time you'd probably consider bringing KDB into your team. And you have to say there's too many fixtures here where I think he could get rested. Not to mention the fact that I think Sam Lee also reported that KDB was asked to be subbed off because he had
Yes.
niggles.
Yes.
So we probably will get more news about KDB and whether he gets to start this Fulham game, but that already tempers my expectation in terms of minutes, even if he was to start. And then second of all, I think even if he starts these two games, which would be fantastic, right, from a City point of view, and just being able to, let's say, if you had KDB and you knew certainly that he was going to start these two games, I don't think the EV difference is actually as high as it probably would look like on review.
Yeah.
But the concern, of course, is going to be game week 35, where Salah once again gets to play at home. So he's got 3 home games back to back, and he plays Brentford then, whereas KDB will be playing Leeds just before that Real Madrid game. And I really can't see how KDB makes it out of all 3 games as a starter, at least particularly without severely diminished minutes. So I think Salah is the clear option. And unfortunately, that's just the way it goes because KDB is still so expensive. You can't afford a premium right now unless, once again, you hemorrhage a lot of team value elsewhere.
Yeah, and also just to round out that this particular point, I think you would rather prefer two defense and Holland right now,
Mm.
or maybe one defense, one midfielder and Holland. And the midfielder is not KDB. I would prefer someone like Grealish, I think, over KDB right now, just because he's cheaper, and also the fact that he's been consistently playing minutes ever since we restarted after the World Cup. He's just missed. I think he's not started for just one game post World Cup, which was the United game where he came on and scored. So if you look at that kind of a long-term X minutes or minutes pattern, you definitely would bet on Grealish at least getting 2 starts. He could have his minutes managed, but he is, I think, more assured of minutes overall than KDB. Of course, because he's younger, fitter, and there's a lot of things that go into making that decision. But other than that, I definitely agree with you. Salah is clearly the pick if you don't own Salah right now, and 2 home games is pretty much like icing on the cake, I think, because if it's away, you've also seen similar to United. I think there's been gap between how Liverpool performs at home and away from home. I think so because both games are at home, you should be completely fine bringing Salah in, I think. The next discussion point is defenders. So if you were to bring a defender in, essentially transferring out maybe an Arsenal defender, maybe Chilwell, something of that nature, who do you go for? Would it be Trent, who is clearly the favorite in terms of EV, or if you have budget restraints, you go for someone like Robertson, Diaz, or Konate? What are your opinions on that?
Yeah, so the Konate one's interesting. I think let's just start there because he was sort of confirmed out due to injury related reasons.
Yeah,
So I think that already gives me a little bit of concern. I can see his X-Mins as something around 78, 80 on review, and that's slightly concerning to me because I think that's potentially overestimating. I do think Klopp is and also Liverpool are usually erring on the safe side with players and managing them coming back from an injury, that sort of thing. So I feel like that sort of throws Kanate out as an option, although I have spoken to even FPL Kanate himself, and he does find Kanate as a super appealing option just because, of course, he is much preferred in terms of how aggressive he is as well. And I think the sort of
yeah,
pairing with Van Dijk has worked out really well in terms of ensuring that Liverpool don't actually lose too many balls. Of course, he made one mistake in the Leeds game, but you
yeah.
can clearly see that Klopp has a preference towards him, and the fact that he was missing simply because of an injury suggests that. Diaz, I think, is probably the City option that you like the most because Pep constantly speaks about how Stones has to have minutes managed. Now, Stones, of course, seems like the most appealing defender because we've seen 2 wonder goals from him lately, but I think Diaz is still the better option there in terms of ensuring you potentially could get 2 starts out of any defender from City not named Ederson. So I would actually really prefer those secondary options as Robertson and Diaz. But going back to your initial point, I mean, Trent is far, far clearer above these options because we know Robertson could still be due for one rest potentially. It's the simple fact that he's played a lot of fixtures, but I feel like Trent is maybe more essential to the system that they're currently playing. That's a little bit of conjecture of, well, we've seen Trent get rested in games. I think the Chelsea Liverpool game is a good example of that, but he's only really improved in terms of how much he contributes to this team on the offensive point of view. So I think Trent is by far the best option this week, and he might even be considered a captaincy option. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. I just think Trent is the best transfer to go for, and it goes back to that point about how you choose to spend your funds, right? I would prioritize going Trent and Salah this week over any other player in this game first, and your transfer should be aimed there. And yeah.
Yeah, I just have two things. The first thing I think is Konate. If you know, like, let's say you hear from Klopp or any other Liverpool sources, you hear that Konate is fit to start. I definitely think he starts both. So it's a binary thing where if he's reported unfit, he's just not going to start. But if he starts, he's going to definitely play both. So you need to take that into consideration because it's not a simple case of, oh, he might get subbed at 80 minutes. That's not the case when you see his minutes at 78 or 80 on the review. It's a clear case of, especially in a double game week, you don't want your player to not start one and then start the other because they lose the appeal of having two games. And the other point is for Trent, the benchings that we've seen for Trent were when he was playing right back or the more traditional right back in the Liverpool system. But with his new role, even though we've had a smaller sample to judge, what formation and or what players Klopp employs in the system, I think that Trent becomes slightly more unique in that I don't think anyone else can quite play the role that he is playing right now in terms of creativity and helping out the attack whenever he can. We've seen him so much central since he started playing that role that it's almost as if he's finding new ways to assist players, and he has already done that. So, and you've already benefited from that, so I'm sure you appreciate his new positioning as well. So we'll be back with the free hit 34 draft. So the free hit draft, of course, because there are some people, or there is a small percentage of people that will be playing free hit in 34, considering the number of double game weeks we have. So we can just quickly look into the optimal draft that review has right now and talk through what we think the picks are, and if you can think of any alternatives in terms of strategy. So the current 11 suggested by review is Ederson in goal, Trent, Robertson and Diaz in defense, Salah captain, Rashford, Mitoma, McAllister, March, Holland vice captain and Martial. So what are your early thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, early thoughts is I sort of hate Martial, but
Yeah, of course.
you'll have to see where you can sort of make money back, and that's why I kind of did a video on a free hit draft, and I suggested going 4-5-1 because it's effectively the same draft, but you swap Martial in for Shaw, which I feel like could be quite interesting. United are
Yeah,
fully capable of getting a clean sheet at home. And with Martial, I actually think his minutes are a little bit too high in review. And if you take his minutes down, then you're bringing yourself back to a single game weaker, and maybe you don't want to do that. So that's my initial thoughts. But I think the draft is actually brilliant. And, people are underestimating, once again, the Brighton team because they
yeah,
didn't really step up versus Nottingham Forest. But the XGI was still fantastic in that game across all three players, really. So I love the fact that you get to take into account that. And we know Brighton, I mean, even De Zerbi as well, if you go back to his Sassuolo days, is not exactly a manager who really cares about XGC, as long as his
yeah.
XG is higher. So, yeah.
Yeah, and also just to point out that Shaw is first on the bench. So
Yeah.
if you reduce Martial's minutes in by a lot, Shaw will spring into the first 11, and you will end up with a 4-5-1, as you said. So I think that just makes sense, and it's a minutes safe draft, I think, compared to what it would be if you started Martial, because I just don't see how you could go to Martial looking at the fact that he was benched again, even though he's technically fit. So there could still be some underlying fitness issues which we've been there a lot. So we don't really want to keep going there again and again. And finally, as always, the captaincy picks. So I'll go first with the review ones, and then you can maybe see what transfer algorithm has. So for review, we have Salah, Holland, and Trent Alexander-Arnold, which is of no surprise. I think the only surprise is Salah is 0.21 ahead of Holland right now with the default X minutes. And if you are confident that Holland is going to play more than 80 minutes in both games, I think Holland will move ahead of Salah in your own EV drafts. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm going to say right now, like, I mean, you don't have to be confident Haaland playing 80 minutes.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think Haaland is clearly the captaincy, and I will commend you for going Salah, but no, I won't. Sorry, I won't. Not after that performance versus West Ham as well.
yeah,
But yeah, I mean, look, it's not close. It's definitely Salah and Holland. Even if you look at transfer algorithms picks, which actually haven't been updated, so this is almost the EV values as of a week ago, which obviously is subject to change. But it was Salah clear and then Holland second. But I don't see any world where I'm not going Holland. Even if I was chasing rank, I would still be going Haaland as well, and just letting my team, do the rest and hopefully take care of variance in that sort of sense. Trent is, as you mentioned, a third option. I think it's interesting, right? Because this is a week where I would seriously consider Liverpool's chances of getting a clean sheet being higher than, for example, versus Nottingham Forest, because Fulham right now are potentially the most blunt weapon in the Premier League because of the injuries that they have and Mitrovic being suspended. Now, it really depends whether you have Wilson confirmed out and you still have Willian out. These two players are probably essential to whether Fulham can even produce any sort of attacking returns versus City and Liverpool. But I would be somewhat tempted by Trent even over Salah. I think you have to go back to Haaland being that close on review, and yeah, I'm going Haaland 100%. I don't care what review says.
No, I think same here. There's no way I'm not captaining Holland. And if anyone wants to play the triple captain, I think this is a perfectly fine week to
Yeah.
do that with Holland. And you'll probably rake in more points than we did when we triple captained him and got a meager 24 points. So hopefully his EO will be below 200% so that all of us can enjoy his points and not just the triple captainers.
Yeah, shout outs to the 15% of players who didn't go for Haaland this week.
Oof, yeah. I think that's
Joking.
a great place to end the pod this week. So have a good one, I guess.
All right, take care. See you guys.